Hey, Bobby Manning here from Orlando with Noa Dalzell after the Celtics pulled away late from the Magic and won Game 4 to take a 3-1 lead in this series. Jayson Tatum, phenomenal with 37 points, playing through a wrist injury late. Kristaps Porzingis managed foul trouble, and the series appears over. I feel pretty good about it going back to Boston, given that they survived this one last big punch by the Magic. How are you feeling?
Feeling good. This was a tough game. This has been a tough series, and I think there's a lot to acknowledge about how difficult the Magic defense has been. Every basket has been a struggle. This feels like old-fashioned.
You've gained a lot of respect for the Magic.
I honestly had a lot of respect for them. I think the defensive thing, they're even better defensively than I realized, even though the numbers were always there. But just seeing it in action, I don't know how much of it is Drew's absence as well. I think he is an underrated connector piece. But yeah, I think this was a huge win because you go back home tied 2-2. They're feeling bad. They don't want to be tied 2-2 going back home when they're looking around in Oklahoma City, Cleveland. Other teams are taking care of business, and now they're in this dogfight against a team that really has nothing to lose. And so that 4-minute stretch was by far the biggest 4-minute stretch of the year so far, and they ran away with it. It was really kind of incredible to watch.
So we were texting in the fourth quarter, and the Porzingis thing was big for me because he wasn't playing great at times in this game. Ends up with 5 fouls after the fourth. Joe was holding them out there in the third. At the start of the third, they go with Luke Cornett and the double big lineup to begin that stretch, and they put him in at 4. And I know we were saying, all right, do you put him back in? Do you hold him out here? It was that same discussion we had about the Jaylen thing after last game. And they put him in, and he got a dunk right away. Jaylen called it the play of the game after. And that ended up being a critical moment in this one, and it sent them on a 10-5 run to close it out.
Yeah, and I think this was a tough one because unlike the Jaylen play, where I felt pretty strongly that Jaylen should just be out there for those last few minutes of Game 3, because at that point it's like you really need to make a push to that in that moment. I felt like in this one he was just in foul trouble the whole game. Every time he came back in, it's like he immediately picked up a foul. So from Joe Mazzulla's standpoint, I have a very liberal view on how coaches should treat star players with fouls, and that's usually to let them play through it. But at a certain point today, KP was just not happening for him. And I started thinking at one point, like, this just might not be his series because he's missing bunnies over guys that really should not be able to guard him and have not been able to guard him all year. And then defensively, I don't want to say he had the worst whistle because I don't want to complain more about the officiating, but he got a little bit unlucky a couple times. And when there was a ticky-tack foul, it was normally him that was getting called. And they were hunting him more than any team that I've seen this season. So it was a tough go for him, but in totality, he actually made a pretty good impact in this game. And you mentioned that and one dunk, that was the play of the game. But even early on, some alley-oop dunks, like he was able to generate some offense, even though it wasn't always so pretty. And then he found some moments to be impactful. And when you look at it, what he was able to do, I thought that he actually was one of the guys that really helped him tonight.
Yeah, White too. White got him going with those pick and roll plays early. He had a chase down stop and transition in this game where there was the second biggest moment. You probably could have argued it was a bigger moment to that Porzingis one if you wanted to. So he was out of this world. You get decent games from those two, but it's really Tatum and Brown who carried this thing. They closed it out after that Porzingis dunk. Free throws in droves for both of them. Both of them had 20 points. Tatum with 37, as well as 11 rebounds.
And just shout out to them, 24 of 25 from the line, those two guys combined.
Yeah.
Which is one thing to get to the line, but the Magic Stars were not hitting free throws this entire series, and that was a huge difference in these last few games.
And when I kept thinking back in this series about all the scuffles, and there were more tonight, Horford and Carter got into it after Carter shoved White, and there was a tense moment between KCP and Tatum again.
What even happened there? That was so random.
I don't know. I want to ask Tatum about that after. No one ended up asking that one. But there's more and more physicality in this game, more and more of those hard fouls. Tatum took one, too, where he landed on the wrist again. It looked like he aggravated that at one point after Anthony Black fouled him. But just like in Game 2, which impressed me that win, they got up and shot all their free throws and just took the fouls that the Magic gave them and kept it moving. And, I thought Joe deserved some credit for that because he kept shifting it away from the talk of the officiating and all that. Felt like Jaylen refocused and just got to the line in this one and went there and hit them all. Tatum, who's taken as many hits as anybody in this series, just kept going to the line and hitting them. So I'll give the Celtics that, even though the Magic's antics bothered them at times in this series clearly, and maybe will inspire some teams down the line to try something similar. They got the calls, and they went to the line, they hit them, as you mentioned, and I think that said a lot about how they responded to the last game in particular.
And I think responding to physicality has become such a talking point in this series that it almost loses meaning in a sense, but it can kind of mean two different things. One is, matching that aggression, doing the same things back, doing the hard fouls. And that's the part of the matching the physicality that I don't necessarily think benefited the Celtics team. And they didn't really do a ton of it. Porzingis had one hard foul that was very Magic-esque. I think it was on Franz Wagner. But in general, this is a team that doesn't foul. That's what made this team elite defensively all season.
And they stuck to it.
And they stuck to it, exactly. And they could have, I think an undisciplined Celtics team says, they're going to foul us, we're going to foul them back. And that's what you don't want to see. And I think there was moments where you could see in Game 3 and even a little bit tonight where it's like a frustration foul, and you don't want to see those. That's not matching the physicality. That's kind of letting the physicality affect your style of play. Matching the physicality, to me, is driving to the basket and not avoiding contact and finishing through it and not worrying about the call, but scoring regardless. And I thought that that's what Tatum and Brown did really well. And particularly Tatum today, as Jaylen pointed out many times, that it was really Tatum that did it effectively in this game. But that's where I saw the change, is that in Game 1, I felt like Tatum was kind of shying away from the contact, and it was a very different player today.
Another weird bench game, too. We hit on the show. I do want to go back there for a minute because Pritchard scored 0 in this game, which is just odd. I felt like he was effective, but couldn't get on the scoreboard after hoping to bounce back from a game where he only took 2 shots. Hauser hit 2 shots after
big
not
shots. They needed those
at all
too
in the first 3 games, but he still only ends up playing 6 minutes in this game, I believe.
Is that what it was?
I think he was down there at least in the second half. And then you get into Cornette, who I like the minutes he played because they survived them, but he's not doing the screening and rolling stuff with Tatum, and the defensive impact hasn't been there either. So I think with a lot of the stuff, including that in this series, when we look back on it, if the Celtics do close this out in 5, you're wondering, does all this stuff carry forward, or is this just a bad matchup? I know Kristaps talked about that a little bit with this one too, that even though it's looked weird in this one, that won't necessarily be the case in the next one. Knicks are looming now. Definitely a different kind of team. But bench scoring, Porzingis, a reliance on Tatum and Brown, those things have started to become pretty big trends to this series.
You know what I was thinking? And this is spurred by something Porzingis said, I think maybe to you, about how, there's an adjustment from the regular season to the playoffs and physicality. And I don't know if he said it, but what I thought in the moment is Tatum and Brown know that because they've played in a million playoff games, and so there's not really an adjustment for them. You're able to see kind of from the moment that the playoff series started, those 2 guys do what they do.
Bench guys haven't been through that as much.
They haven't been through it at all. I mean, Sam was a part of last year's playoff run, but they didn't face any team that was as physical as this Magic team. Pritchard really does not have extensive playoff experience. He has some, but not expansive. And Luke also really doesn't have a lot. And I felt like Luke was one of their, incredible stories this past season. But teams didn't really game plan for Luke. He wasn't in a series where people said, this is when Luke checks into the game. I don't think he was a focal point of opposing teams' game plan. And if they did a terrible job executing because he kept catching teams asleep. And so there's an adjustment period for this team. And I don't think this is the kind of first round that eases you into the postseason if you're a bench player.
Well, it's an interesting,
this just hit you over the head, and maybe that's going to be a good thing for them.
It's an interesting conversation because they are championship tested. Those guys have proven themselves, but like they admitted going into the playoffs, it's going to be hard this time around.
Yeah.
This team is missing a couple guys in Orlando if it is the Knicks next round. I know we both don't feel great about that matchup for New York, but they're healthy and their guys are rolling, and Brunson and Towns are there doing their thing. That could be harder than the Cavs were last year in round 2, who were missing Mitchell and Allen and all the way down the line there. So this could be, like you just mentioned there, an acclimation period for some of the guys who didn't play as much, or some of the guys who might not have been tested as much during that run last year.
Yeah, I think everybody expects this run to be more challenging, and you're already seeing that. I mean, this is
an insane
tougher team, than last year's Miami team. And again, I think that's what this is all about. It's about adjusting. I think this year when Porzingis came back from his injury, there was an adjustment period because he was being defended differently than how he was last year, and there was a lot of film on him and a lot of film on him on the Celtics, and so they had to acclimate, and that was part of their early, January struggles. And I think similarly, he's adjusting right now to the physicality of the Magic. And what's good is because he's probably drawing a lot from this, and he's going to go to the next round, and even if they play the Pistons, it's probably going to be a little bit of a step down because what this Magic team is able to do with their length and their size is pretty unique. They're in a little bit of a league on their own, and I know Oklahoma City has this
They shouldn't be a first-round team.
They shouldn't be a first-round team defensively. Their offense, I think, has shown us why they've fallen there, and also their health. I think they're missing 2 key rotation players, but they're definitely a tougher team than you usually see in the East for a 7 or 8 seed.
It was so important.
The fact that
the
fact that Atlanta could be here right now if they win that 7 game is astonishing. Because I think that would be a night and day.
I think we'd be sitting here talking about being a sweep. In this series, if it's 4-1, I think it'll be Indy style, challenging 4-1, 4-0 in that case. But I don't know whether to say this one's over or not because the Magic have been in every game. They were pretty close in those Boston games too, and I'd have to imagine Jrue Holiday's going to miss the next game again here, which is reduce that margin for error. They're plus 19 with him in this series, and we've seen the margin for error without him in the last 2 games here. So that could continue even going back to Boston there. But you know how it goes sometimes. A team gives their best shot for those 4 games. You go down 3-1, go back to the opposing arena, and you're just out of gas. Don't have the energy for that full 48 again after that. Paolo shot 12 for 32 in this game, the most shots anyone's taken against the Celtics this season.
Really?
So
they've played a lot of ball-dominant players, too.
I felt good about the Magic pushing this to 6. I don't think this is the scenario where that happens, though, unless the Celtics just completely fall asleep or Tatum's more hurt coming out of those couple bruises than we know, or you just get that 50-point Paolo game that I've been waiting for here with them allowing him to shoot one-on-one against them. I don't see those things happening, so I think the Celtics get this done at home.
Yeah, I think, there are teams that are equipped to challenge it and make a 3-1 comeback. I don't think this Magic team is it. I don't think the Celtics team is the kind of team that's going to allow it. So, again, I'm never going to say a series is over when it's a 3-1 in a series because I've watched enough basketball to know not to say that. But do I feel really confident going into Game 5? Do I expect to not be sitting back in this building this year? Absolutely.
You don't want to come back?
No, not this year. I'll be back next year. But I think that ultimately, this was the game they had to win. They had to get some separation on this Magic team, and more importantly, they had to not have them feel more confident. Like you said, going back to TD Garden, knowing they're shorthanded, knowing they're playing the defending champs, the crowd's going to be insane, as it has been, I think, for the first 2 games. They really needed this game, and shout out to them for getting 1 of the 2. I think that was a pretty, admirable feat considering what they have over on that side. And I think
they
individually,
were so close to
Paolo
stealing this
Banchero
one.
and Franz Wagner they're better players than I thought, and I knew they were good players. But Franz in particular, I knew Paolo was great, but Franz in particular, he's impressed me on both ends a little bit more than I expected.
There were some stretches in this game where the Celtics go up 6, 8. You're like, all right,
they're
pulling
back into
away.
it, yeah.
And then he would string together 3 possessions that would pull them right back. He's been out of this world. I haven't heard from him much in this series either. I hope they get a little reflection from him after this one.
I will say though, when Porzingis was speaking in the locker room, Franz's post-game press conference was streaming right above him, and it was such a juxtaposition of Porzingis laughing and Franz looking really sad.
That's a good point. I wasn't looking at that one too closely, but
I don't know what he said, but he didn't look. He looked pretty sad.
I'll point out too. We mentioned the KCP moment. Him shoving Tatum at the end there also kind of looked to me like, we lost. I'm pissed.
Yeah, very. I don't know what Tatum said because he got a tech too.
I don't.
I don't know what he said, but he didn't argue the tech, so I think he knew he deserved it.
Yeah, right.
But yeah,
that was a fitting moment.
I felt very resigned.
Yeah, and so I wouldn't be surprised if Game 5 is that blowout. And the Celtics have blown out the Magic at times this year. You mentioned this is that first win here since 2022, so a giant one. And then Magic again had a real chance to steal this one at 91-91 late there, but the Celtics close it out. Win. Our trip's done here. What was your favorite part?
Those final 4 minutes, honestly,
watching here in the building, not outside.
No, in the building. I think that just you have moments in a playoff run that are special stretches for really good teams, and this was their stretch. It was those final 4 minutes where Tatum kind of asserted himself. Porzingis made some big time defensive plays. Shout out to Al Horford, who we didn't talk about, but just had the most impactful, unimpressive box scoreline you could ever see.
He's worthy of an
just
honorable mention.
diving out of bounds, everywhere blocks.
The offensive rebound.
Yeah,
was
just
critical.
huge. So many big plays, and so I loved watching that. I loved I like being in this building. Honestly, they had a good fan base. I was better than I expected because there was a lot of green here, but it felt like I think Gary Washburn tweeted, it felt like a state championship game where no matter what happened, you had really excited fans. So it's a fun environment to be in. So that was my high.
Yeah, I love the fan base here. They're passionate. They've had some great teams over the years. This looks like the start of one.
I've heard a lot from them over the last few days.
Yeah, so. And they've gotten into it in the series over the calls, and there's been all these scuffles. This one, we wanted this. This is why we wanted it. The competitiveness, the tense moments. I don't think we expected even as many of those as there's been. There's been one in every game so far. But unfortunately, there's also been the bruises, and that's the downside of this series too, is Tatum comes out of it, aggravating that wrist again in this one. We'll see where he ends up for Game 5. Holiday's status still uncertain for that Game 5 as well. And Brown, for some reason or another, has been on the injury report the last 2 games and still look limited at times in this one. So we'll continue to track his status here. That could be the potential downside of playing this series if they come out of it hobbled. But the upside is that they face the defense that is going to test them for that big Oklahoma one we keep thinking about down the line.
Yeah, you have to think about it, seeing what's happening in the Western Conference right now. I feel even a little bit more confident that OKC is going to come out still so early. Celtics
You
have a
picked the
long
field, though, didn't you?
I still picked the field, but the field's percentages are decreasing a little bit. But yeah, Celtics have a long way to go before we're even talking about a finals run, and that'll start on Tuesday at 8:30 p.m. Very late start for us.
Cavs, Thunder moving on. Pacers, Celtics, as well as who else is up 3-1? Knicks.
And they all fought to get there. So while this doesn't feel like a dominant 3-1, that's been kind of the nature around the league. Final minutes really between separating a 2-2 series and a 3-1.
Pistons got screwed. Knicks Celtics feels like it's inevitable right now, but Celtics have to play Game 5 to close this out. We'll be there on Tuesday in Boston for Noa Dalzell. Check out her work over on CelticsBlog.com, as well as You Got Boston coming out after all these games. Great work from her at both those spots, and CLNSmedia.com for all of our coverage here. Subscribe to CLNS Media and Celtics All Access for the podcast, the post games, and everything else we got going on over there, as well as great Patriots coverage this week of that draft. And we will see you back in Boston. Celtics win Game 4 over the Magic.
CLNS Celtics coverage is powered by PrizePicks. Download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup.